They say the woods of Briar Hollow still remember that day, when a lone white bounty hunter named Elias Creed followed a false trail and found two young enslaved sisters, Mara and Mabel, hanging from a tree, a rough sign above them reading, "No mercy for slaves." But here's the part folks whisper about. They were still alive, and the moment their eyes opened, they didn't see a rescuer. They saw a man who looked just like the hunters who had chased them their whole lives. Elias wasn't supposed to care. He'd spent years trying to outrun the shame of his own past, catching people he knew deserved freedom. But something in those twins' quiet strength pulled him back toward the man he used to be. As the sisters fought to heal and Elias fought to earn even a sliver of their trust, a darker truth rose around them. The man who hung them was about to sell their little siblings to the highest bidder. What came next wasn't justice, and it wasn't mercy. It was a war. 3 broken souls against an entire plantation built on cruelty. And once they joined forces, the master's world began to burn. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The afternoon heat pressed down like a suffocating hand. Elias Creed shifted in his saddle, leather creaking beneath him as his horse picked its way along the narrow forest trail. Sweat dampened his collar. His hat brim cast a shadow across weathered features, but it did nothing to ease the sticky warmth that clung to everything. Pine trees rose on either side of the path, their branches creating patches of shade that offered no real relief. Insects hummed in lazy circles. The air smelled of baked earth and resin. Elias studied the ground ahead, his eyes tracing the hoof prints and wagon ruts carved into the dirt. He'd been following these marks for the better part of 2 hours, and nothing about them made sense. "Single runaway," he muttered to himself, echoing the words from the handwritten note he'd received 3 days prior. Alone, on foot, desperate. But the tracks told a different story entirely. 2 horses, maybe 3. A wagon with uneven wheels, fresh marks, no more than a day old, all converging on a specific location rather than spreading out in the pattern of a search. This wasn't a hunt. This was a gathering. Elias slowed his horse, one hand resting on the rifle strapped to his saddle. Years of tracking fugitives had taught him to read landscapes the way other men read newspapers. Every broken branch held meaning. Every disturbed stone told part of a larger tale. And this tale stank of deception. He'd known it from the moment he accepted the assignment. The man who'd approached him in the tavern 3 towns back had been too eager, too specific about the location without providing any real details about the supposed runaway. No name, no description beyond young and black, no mention of which plantation they'd fled from, just coordinates and coin. Elias had taken the money anyway. He always did. A man had to eat, had to keep his horse fed, and his weapons maintained. Bounty hunting paid better than most honest work, and honesty had stopped serving him well years ago. Still, something about this job sat wrong in his gut. The forest grew quieter as he rode deeper into the territory bordering Briar Hollow Plantation. The insects continued their droning, but the birds had gone silent. No rustling in the underbrush, no squirrels chattering in the branches overhead, just stillness. Elias's jaw tightened. He'd felt this particular kind of quiet before. The absence of life that came after violence had passed through an area. Animals knew better than to linger where humans had recently spilled blood. A faint smell reached his nostrils. Smoke, acrid and recent. He urged his horse forward, moving slower now, his senses stretched taut. The rifle felt heavier under his palm. His other hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. The trees thinned ahead, opening into a small clearing. Elias saw the rope first, then the bodies, 2 of them, hanging from a massive oak tree at the clearing's center. Their feet dangled several inches above the ground, toes pointed downward in a grotesque parody of ballet. Dark skin stood out against the pale rope circling their necks. A wooden sign hung between them, nailed to the tree trunk at eye level. The letters had been painted in crude black strokes. No mercy for slaves. Elias's breath caught in his chest. He dismounted in one smooth motion, boots hitting the dirt with barely a sound. His rifle came up instinctively, sweeping the clearing's perimeter. No movement. No hidden watchers. Just the terrible stillness and the two bodies swaying gently in the breeze. He approached slowly, weapon still raised, his eyes scanning every shadow between the trees. That's when he saw it. Movement. Barely perceptible, but there. A finger twitching on one of the hanging forms. Elias lowered the rifle and broke into a run. Up close, he could see they were young. Teenagers, maybe. Girls. Twins, from the look of them, with identical features and matching tattered dresses that had once been blue. Their faces were swollen, lips cracked and bleeding. Rope burns circled their throats in angry red welts, but their chests rose and fell. Shallow. Struggling. Alive. Jesus Christ, Elias breathed. He sheathed his rifle and pulled his hunting knife from his belt, reaching up to saw at the rope holding the first girl. The blade bit through the fibers with practiced efficiency. She dropped. Elias caught her awkwardly, staggering under the sudden weight before lowering her to the ground. She gasped, a horrible rattling sound that spoke of damaged airways and desperate need. Her eyes flew open, unfocused and wild. He turned immediately to the second girl, climbing onto a fallen log to reach the rope. Another few seconds of sawing and she fell too, collapsing in a heap beside her sister. Both girls convulsed, drawing in great heaving breaths that sounded like drowning in reverse. Their hands clawed at their throats, fingers working uselessly at the rope burns. Elias knelt between them, knife still in hand, reaching toward the first girl to check her pulse. She saw the blade. She saw his face. She saw the leather coat, the spurs on his boots, the iron cuff keys hanging from his belt. Terror flooded her features. "No!" she choked out, the word barely audible through her damaged throat. She tried to crawl backward, arms and legs working feebly against the dirt. "No! No! No!" The second girl curled into herself, making her body as small as possible. Her eyes squeezed shut. Tears carved tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "You're here to finish it," she whispered. "Please, please just make it quick." Elias's stomach turned to ice. They thought he was there to kill them. They thought he was the executioner, returned to complete the job the rope had started. He looked down at himself, seeing what they saw. A white man dressed in the uniform of men who hunted people for money. A bounty hunter, a tool of the system that had put them on that rope in the first place. "I'm not—" He stopped, forced his voice lower, softer. "I'm not here to hurt you." The first girl, still trying to drag herself away despite her weakness, spat blood onto the ground. Her eyes blazed with defiance, even as her body failed her. "We know what you are," she said. Elias slowly lowered the knife, then set it on the ground between them. He raised both hands, palms out, and shifted backward to give them space. "You're right," he said quietly. "You know exactly what I am. I've been that man for longer than I care to count." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "But right now, in this moment, I'm a man who just cut 2 people down from a hanging tree, and I'm offering you a chance to survive the night." The girls stared at him, with identical expressions of suspicion and fear. Elias held their gaze steadily. "There's a cabin half a mile west of here, abandoned hunter's shelter. It has walls, a roof, and a door that bars from the inside. I can take you there, get you water. Tend those rope burns before infection sets in." Neither girl moved. "Or," Elias continued, "I can leave right now, right away." Let you make your own choice about what comes next." He gestured toward the darkening sky visible through the tree branches. "But night's coming fast, and you're both too weak to run far. The men who did this might come back to check their work." The second girl, the one who'd spoken of mercy, made a small sound in the back of her throat. Her sister's hand found hers, fingers interlacing despite the trembling in both their arms. Elias waited. He didn't move, didn't reach for them or crowd their space, just stayed where he was, hands visible, breathing steady. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the defiant sister spoke again. "If you try anything—" "You'll fight," Elias finished. "You'll scream. You'll make me regret every second." He nodded. "As you should." He stood slowly, moving like a man approaching spooked horses. He walked to his mount and retrieved a canteen from his saddlebag, then returned and set it on the ground within the girl's reach. "Drink first," he said. "Then we'll talk about moving." The sisters exchanged a long look, some wordless communication passing between them. Then the second girl, the quieter one, reached out with a shaking hand and grabbed the canteen. She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. She passed it to her sister, who drank with equal desperation. Elias stepped back again, giving them room. "My name's Elias Creed," he said, "and I give you my word, what's left of it anyway, that I mean you no harm." The defiant sister wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her eyes never left his face. "Words are cheap," she said hoarsely. "They are," Elias agreed. "So watch what I do instead." Twilight began settling over the clearing like a shroud. Elias approached again, moving with exaggerated slowness. The girls tensed, but didn't retreat this time. He knelt beside the weaker sister first, the quieter one, and slipped one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. She whimpered as he lifted her, her body rigid with fear. "Easy," Elias murmured. "I've got you. Just getting you to the horse." He carried her to his mount and settled her as gently as possible across the saddle. She slumped forward, barely conscious now that the immediate terror had faded. Her sister watched every movement with hawk-like intensity. Elias returned and extended a hand toward the defiant twin. She ignored it, using the tree trunk to pull herself upright. Her legs shook violently, but she remained standing through sheer force of will. "I can walk," she said. "Suit yourself," Elias replied. He took his horse's reins and began leading the animal westward. The defiant sister followed 3 steps behind, one hand trailing along the horse's flank for balance. Her breathing came in ragged gasps, but she kept pace. The forest darkened around them as they walked. Elias moved carefully, choosing the smoothest path, avoiding roots and stones that might trip his wounded companions. The girl on the horse drifted in and out of consciousness. Her sister never stopped watching him. Elias didn't blame her. He'd spent years teaching people like her to fear men like him. Now he was asking them to trust him instead. The absurdity of it would have made him laugh if the situation weren't so desperately grim. Night fell completely by the time the cabin's outline appeared through the trees. It was exactly as Elias remembered, a small structure with log walls and a slanted roof, built decades ago by hunters who no longer used these. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, but it would close. It would lock. It would keep them safe until morning. Elias tied his horse to a nearby tree, then carefully lifted the unconscious sister down from the saddle. He carried her inside and laid her on the packed dirt floor, using his coat as a makeshift pillow beneath her head. The defiant sister appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the darkness outside. She looked at her twin lying motionless on the ground. She looked at Elias kneeling beside her. She looked at the door with its heavy wooden bar. Then she stepped inside. The cabin smelled of rot and old animal nests. Dust hung thick in the air, visible in the last rays of sunlight that pushed through gaps between warped boards. Elias surveyed the space quickly. One room, maybe 12 feet square, with a stone hearth blackened by years of fires. Two wooden bedrolls sat rolled against the far wall, their canvas covers stiff with age and mildew. Better than the ground outside. Better than nothing. He crossed to the bedrolls and kicked them open, checking for vermin. Finding none, he laid them flat near the hearth and returned outside for the twins. The defiant sister stood exactly where he'd left her, swaying slightly but upright. Her eyes tracked his every movement as he lifted her unconscious sibling and carried her inside. He placed the girl on the nearest bedroll with careful precision, arranging her limbs so the rope burns on her neck wouldn't press against anything. When he turned back, the defiant twin had already claimed the second bedroll, positioning herself between him and her sister. She sat with her back rigid, one hand gripping a broken chair leg she must have grabbed while his back was turned. The jagged end pointed at his chest. Elias stopped moving. He raised both hands slowly, palms out, and took 3 measured steps backward until his shoulders touched the opposite wall. "Smart," he said quietly. "Keep that close." The girl's knuckles whitened around the makeshift weapon. Blood still crusted at the corners of her mouth. Her voice came out raw and grinding. "Why are you doing this?" "Which part?" "All of it." She jerked the chair leg toward the door. "Cutting us down, bringing us here, playing savior." Her eyes narrowed. "Men like you don't help people like us, unless there's profit in it." Elias lowered his hands slowly and moved to the hearth. He kept his movements obvious and unthreatening as he gathered the few pieces of dry wood stacked beside the fireplace. The girl's eyes never left him. "You're right," he said. "Most don't." He struck flint against steel, coaxing sparks into the tinder. A small flame caught, grew, began consuming the kindling he fed it. Warmth spread slowly through the confined space. "So, what makes you different?" The girl shifted her weight, grimacing at the pain the movement caused. "Or are you just better at hiding what you want?" Elias stood and dusted his hands on his trousers. He crossed to his saddlebag, still moving with exaggerated care, and retrieved a small pot and several cloth-wrapped bundles. He held them up briefly so she could see what he carried before setting the pot near the fire. "I need to get water," he said. "There's a stream 30 yards north. I'll leave the door unbarred. You can lock it behind me if you want." "How do I know you won't come back with men?" "You don't." The honesty seemed to surprise her. She blinked, reassessing. Elias picked up the pot and moved toward the door. "But if I wanted you dead or captured, I would have left you hanging. And if I wanted you for bounty money, I would have already had my rifle out." He paused in the doorway. "I'll be 5 minutes." He stepped into the gathering darkness and listened. No sound of the bar sliding into place. The girl was watching, waiting, but not locking him out. Progress. The stream was exactly where he remembered. A thin ribbon of clear water cutting through moss-covered stones. He filled the pot quickly and returned to find the cabin door still open, firelight spilling across the threshold. The defiant twin sat in the same position, chair legs still ready, but her sister had stirred. The unconscious girl's eyes fluttered open briefly before closing again. A good sign. Awareness returning. Elias hung the pot over the fire on an old iron hook and waited for the water to heat. While it warmed, he stepped back outside and moved through the darkness with practiced efficiency, searching for specific plants he knew grew in these woods. Plantain leaves, comfrey root, both good for reducing inflammation and preventing infection. He found what he needed within minutes and returned to the cabin. The girl watched as he crushed the leaves between his palms, then shredded the comfrey root with his knife. He added both to the warming water, creating a paste that would draw out the worst of the rope burn damage. "What is that?" the girl demanded. "Poultice, for your neck." Elias stirred the mixture. "Burns like that get infected easy. Infection turns to fever. Fever kills you as sure as the rope would have. She touched her throat gingerly, feeling the raw, damaged skin. And I'm supposed to let you put that on me? You're supposed to do whatever keeps you alive. Elias met her eyes. But if you'd rather do it yourself, I can talk you through it. The girl studied him for a long moment. Then she glanced at her sister, still barely conscious on the bedroll. Her first, she said finally. Elias nodded. He soaked a clean cloth in the warm poultice and approached the unconscious twin slowly. The defiant sister shifted, maintaining her position between them, chair leg ready to strike if he made a wrong move. He knelt beside the injured girl and began applying the mixture with gentle precision, working around the rope burns with careful fingers. The girl whimpered softly, but didn't wake. As he worked, a memory surfaced unbidden. Different cabin, different girl, same kind of wounds. 3 years ago. A woman and her son, maybe 5 years old, both bearing marks that spoke of systematic cruelty. Elias had tracked them for 2 weeks on behalf of a plantation owner who wanted them returned for public punishment. He'd found them hiding in a barn just across the Tennessee border. The woman had begged, the boy had cried, and Elias had looked at the scars on their backs, the burns on their arms, the broken fingers that had healed crooked. He'd looked at them and seen his own children's faces, so he'd given them directions north, given them money for passage, given them a 3-day head start before reporting he'd lost their trail. The plantation owner had been furious. Other bounty hunters had called him soft. His wife had called him a fool for throwing away their security over strangers. She'd left 2 months later, taking their daughters with her. Elias blinked, forcing himself back to the present. He finished treating the unconscious twins' wounds and turned to her sister. Your turn. The girl hesitated, fingers tightening on her weapon. Then she set it down carefully within easy reach and tilted her head back, exposing her damaged throat. Elias applied the poultice with the same gentle efficiency. This girl stayed conscious throughout, her breathing shallow and controlled. She flinched when the mixture touched the worst of the burns, but made no sound. Why did they hang you? Elias asked quietly as he worked. We fought back. Her voice carried bitter pride. One of the overseers tried to separate us, send my sister to the fields, and keep me in the house for... She didn't finish, didn't need to. Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. So you ran. So we fought. Both of us together. Broke his arm. Maybe his jaw, too. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Worth it. And they decided to make an example. They decided to kill us slow. The girl's eyes hardened. Let us hang until we stopped breathing. Then leave us there for the crows. A warning to anyone else who got ideas. Elias finished applying the poultice and sat back. But you didn't die. We held our breath, played dead when they checked. She touched her neck again. Almost didn't work. Another minute and it wouldn't have been playing. Smart, Elias said again. The girl watched him return the pot to the hearth. When he settled against the far wall, maximizing the distance between them, some of the tension left her shoulders. You still haven't answered my question, she said. Why are you helping us? Elias was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Outside, night insects began their chorus. Because 3 years ago I didn't, he finally said. And it cost me everything I thought mattered. He looked at her directly. Turns out, the things I lost weren't worth keeping anyway. The girl frowned, processing this. You let someone go. I let a mother and her child go. Their owner wanted them back for a whipping that would have killed them both. Elias stared at the fire. I told him I lost their trail. He didn't believe me. Word got around. Wife left. Work dried up. Other hunters wouldn't ride with me. Good. Maybe. Elias shifted against the wall. Point is, whoever hung you wasn't trying to catch you. They were trying to kill you. That means you're not valuable property anymore. You're a problem to be eliminated. The girl's sister stirred on her bedroll, mumbling something incoherent. The defiant twin immediately moved closer, taking her hand. "We can't go back," she whispered. "No," Elias agreed. "You can't. And you're not taking us anywhere? I'm keeping you alive through tonight. Tomorrow we figure out next steps." He crossed his arms over his chest. "But no, I'm not taking you anywhere you don't choose to go." The girl studied him for a long moment. Then she reached for the canteen he'd given them earlier and drank deeply. She passed it to her sister, who accepted it without opening her eyes, sipping slowly. Elias watched them care for each other with the practiced efficiency of people who'd only ever had each other to rely on. "What are your names?" he asked. The defiant twin looked at him warily. Giving a name meant something, meant acknowledgement, meant the beginning of trust, however fragile. "Mara," she said finally. She gestured to her sister. "That's Mabel. Mara and Mabel." Elias nodded. "I'll remember." The fire burned lower. Mabel's breathing evened out into something approaching real sleep. Mara lay down beside her sister, but kept the chair leg close, her eyes open and watchful. Elias remained against the wall, perfectly still. He would sit watch through the darkness. He would listen for riders. He would keep these two girls alive until morning. It wouldn't erase what he'd done for years in service of the system that had brutalized them, but it was a start. Morning sunlight sliced through the cabin's broken slats, carving the dim interior into geometric patterns of light and shadow. Elias woke stiff from his position against the wall, his back protesting the night spent on hard earth. He stood carefully, keeping his movements quiet and controlled. The twins remained asleep. Mabel lay curled on her side, one hand still clutching her sister's sleeve. Mara had finally surrendered to exhaustion sometime before dawn, though even in sleep her jaw stayed clenched, her body ready to wake at the slightest disturbance. Elias stepped outside into cool morning air. The forest was alive with birdsong, a stark contrast to yesterday's ominous silence. He walked the perimeter of the cabin, checking for fresh tracks. Nothing. No riders had passed during the night. He returned to his saddlebags and retrieved what little food remained. Dried venison strips, hard enough to break teeth. A small sack of wild onions. Some wrinkled potatoes he'd bought 3 towns back. Not much, but enough to provide strength. He built up the fire and set water to boil in the pot. While it heated, he cut the potatoes into rough chunks and added them to the water along with the onions. The dried meat he set aside on a clean cloth. Better to chew it plain than risk making the broth too salty. The smell of cooking food filled the cabin. Behind him, he heard movement, fabric rustling, a sharp intake of breath. "It's just breakfast," Elias said without turning around. "Nothing special, but it'll keep your strength up." Silence. Then Mara's voice, rough from sleep and damaged vocal cords. "Where are we?" "Old hunting cabin. About 3 miles from where I found you." Elias stirred the pot. "Nobody's used this place in years. We're safe for now." Mabel whispered something too quiet to hear. Her sister responded in the same hushed tone. Elias heard them helping each other sit up, movements slow and painful. When he finally turned around, both twins were upright on their bedrolls, watching him with identical expressions of wary exhaustion. In full daylight, he could see them more clearly. Both around 15 or 16. Same high cheekbones, same dark eyes. Mabel's face carried more gentleness, her gaze observant, but less hostile. Mara's features were sharper, harder, shaped by the kind of protective anger that became armor. "How long?" Mara asked. "Since I found you? About 12 hours. Elias ladled the simple broth into 2 tin cups he'd cleaned earlier. "You both need to eat. Your bodies have been through hell." He set the cups on the floor between them and the fire, then retreated to his position against the wall. The distance mattered. Proximity meant threat. The twins exchanged another glance. Some silent communication passed between them. Then Mabel reached for one of the cups, her movements tentative. She sniffed the broth carefully before taking a small sip. Her eyes closed briefly. Relief crossed her features. Mara waited, watching her sister for signs of distress. When none came, she claimed the second cup and drank more aggressively, her body recognizing its desperate need for sustenance. Elias offered them the dried meat. This time, Mara took it first, tearing off a piece with her teeth before passing the rest to Mabel. They ate in silence, their hunger temporarily overriding their fear. When they'd finished, Elias collected the cups and stepped outside to refill them with fresh water from the stream. He'd barely crossed the threshold when he heard footsteps behind him. Mara had followed. She kept her distance, maybe 20 feet back, her posture defensive. Her hand gripped something. He couldn't see what, but he assumed she'd reclaimed her makeshift weapon. Elias continued to the stream without acknowledging her presence directly. He knelt by the water's edge and filled both cups, then stood and turned to face her. "You're smart to follow," he said. "Can't trust a stranger." "Can't trust anyone," Mara corrected. She stood partially concealed behind a tree, ready to bolt or fight, depending on his next move. Elias nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Why did they really hang us?" The question came sharp and sudden. "Not the overseers. I know why they did it. I mean whoever hired you. Why did they want us dead instead of dragged back?" "I don't know yet." Elias started walking back toward the cabin, moving slowly so she could maintain her safe distance. "But the bounty notice I received didn't mention 2 girls. It mentioned a single runaway male. Wrong description, wrong location, wrong everything." Mara processed this. A trap. Maybe, or misdirection. Elias paused. "Either way, someone wanted me in that clearing at that specific time. To find us, or to get caught up in whatever happened to you." He met her eyes. "I haven't figured it out yet." They reached the cabin. Mara stopped outside while Elias entered and set the cups down near her sister. Mabel accepted hers gratefully, drinking in small sips. "We weren't trying to run," Mabel said quietly. "Not at first." Elias settled back against his wall. "What were you trying to do?" The twins exchanged another look. Mara remained in the doorway, backlit by morning sun. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of a confession. "We faked it. Our deaths." She touched her throat. "When they strung us up, we held our breath, made ourselves go limp. They checked for heartbeats, but didn't check close enough. Left us hanging there as a warning to the others. How long? Long enough my vision went black at the edges." Mara's jaw tightened. "Long enough I thought maybe we'd waited too long. But we didn't," Mabel added softly. "When they left, we got ourselves down. Took a long time. Our hands were tied." Elias imagined it. 2 girls, half strangled, working together to free themselves from a hanging tree. The desperation, the determination, the sheer will to survive. "Why did they hang you in the first place?" Mara's expression hardened. "Charles Breyer, the plantation master. He sold our little brother 2 months ago. Sold our sister 3 weeks after that. Both of them young enough to still believe kindness existed somewhere in the world." Her voice cracked slightly. She cleared her throat and continued. "He was planning to sell the rest. Our other siblings, 4 more, all younger than us. We heard him talking to a trader about splitting them up for better prices." Mara's hands clenched into fists. "We couldn't let that happen. We tried to steal the sale documents, tried to ruin them so he couldn't complete the transactions. We got caught," Mabel finished quietly. Elias felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced 3 years ago when he'd seen those scars on a mother's back. That moment when the abstract brutality of the system became specific, undeniable, personal. "So he tried to kill you," Elias said. "He wanted to make sure everyone knew what happened to slaves who interfered with his business." Mara's voice carried bitter understanding. We weren't valuable enough to keep anymore. We were examples. Silence filled the cabin. Outside, birds continued their morning songs, oblivious to human cruelty. Your other siblings, Elias said carefully. Where are they now? Still on the plantation. Still waiting to be sold. Mabel's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Still thinking we abandoned them. We didn't abandon them, Mara said fiercely. We're going to get them out. Elias studied both girls, Mabel's quiet determination, Mara's protective fury. They truly believed they could rescue their family. Against a plantation system, against armed overseers, against Charles Breyer himself. They believed it because they had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. This bounty assignment I received, Elias said slowly. It feels wrong because it was designed to feel wrong. Someone wanted me here, wanted me involved. Why would anyone want that? Mabel asked. I don't know. Elias stood, decision crystallizing. But I'm going into town. Need to gather proper supplies if you're going to heal correctly. Medical supplies, real food. Maybe some answers about who sent me that notice. Mara's distrust flared immediately. You're leaving. I'm getting supplies. You're leaving us here defenseless while you ride off to help you. Elias kept his voice level. You need bandages, proper medicine, food that isn't dried meat and boiled roots. I can get those things in town. Why should we believe you'll come back? The question hung between them. Elias could have offered reassurances, could have made promises. Instead, he told the truth. 3 years ago, I tracked a woman and her son. They'd run from a plantation where the owner branded his property like cattle. I found them hiding in a barn, terrified, starving. He met Mara's eyes. I let them go. Gave them money. Gave them directions. Lost everything because I finally did one decent thing. That doesn't answer my question, Mara said. Yes, it does. Elias moved toward the door. I'm helping you because I have to. Because if I don't, I'm still the same man who spent years hunting people for money. Still the same man who looked away from suffering because it was profitable. He stepped outside and began saddling his horse. Mara watched from the doorway, suspicion radiating from her like heat. I'll be back by sundown, Elias said, tightening the saddle straps. You have my word. Your word means nothing to us, Mara replied. I know. Elias swung into the saddle. But it's all I have to give right now. He rode toward town, leaving the twins alone in the cabin. Behind him, he heard Mara move to the window, heard her whisper something to her sister. The words carried just far enough for him to make them out. I won't trust him until he proves he's not like the others. The town squatted at the edge of Briar Hollow territory like a tick feeding on commerce. Weathered storefronts lined the main street. Horses stood tethered to posts, swishing flies with their tails. The air smelled of dust and horse dung and something cooking in the tavern across the way. Elias tied his mount outside the general store, scanning the street out of habit. Nothing looked immediately threatening. Just the usual mid-morning activity. A woman carrying a basket. 2 men loading crates onto a wagon. A dog sleeping in the shade. He pushed through the store's entrance, bell jangling above his head. The interior was dim and cluttered. Shelves stacked with dry goods, tools, fabric bolts, ammunition. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles, glanced up from his ledger and nodded acknowledgement. Elias moved toward the medical supplies. Bandages, antiseptic, something for infection if the rope burns festered. He gathered items methodically, trying to calculate cost against the dwindling coins in his pocket. 2 men stood near the front window, speaking in low voices. Elias paid them no attention at first. Then certain words cut through the ambient noise. Briar Hollow riders combing the woods, looking for that bounty hunter what turned traitor. Elias's hands stilled on a tin of salve. Charles Breyer himself put out the word. the first man continued. Says there's a man been interfering with plantation business, helping property escape. Wants him found and dealt with permanent-like. Heard it was the same fellow helped that slave woman 3 years back. The one with the boy. That's the one. Briar's had people watching for him. Set up some kind of trap to draw him into the territory. The tin felt suddenly heavy in Elias's grip. The fake bounty notice, the wrong description, the isolated clearing where 2 girls hung from a tree. Not coincidence. Design. They'd wanted him here. Wanted him caught up in whatever brutal message Charles Briar was sending. Wanted him blamed, or killed, or both. How many riders? The second man asked. 8, maybe 10. Armed, mean. They catch him. Won't be no trial. Elias set the supplies on the counter carefully, keeping his movements casual. The proprietor tallied the cost. Elias paid, gathering his purchases into a canvas sack. That'll do you, the proprietor said. Elias nodded and turned toward the door. One of the men by the window looked his way. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed across the man's weathered face. You! The word came out sharp. You're him! The one what helped that slave woman run north. Elias's hand moved instinctively toward his belt. The second man stepped away from the window, blocking the exit. The proprietor ducked behind his counter. Got no quarrel here, Elias said quietly. Charles Briar's got a quarrel with you. The first man's hand hovered near the pistol at his hip. Says you're the kind of white man makes things difficult for decent folk trying to run their businesses proper. I'm just passing through. Not anymore, you ain't. The man drew his weapon halfway. You're coming with us to Briar Hollow. Let the master decide what to do with... Elias threw the canvas sack at the man's face and bolted toward the back of the store. Shouts erupted behind him. The proprietor yelled something about property damage. Footsteps pounded after him. He crashed through a storage room, scattering crates, found the back door, and wrenched it open. The alley beyond smelled of rotting vegetables and stagnant water. He ran. Behind him, the door slammed open again. More voices joined the pursuit. Elias vaulted a fence, landed hard, kept running. His horse was around front, too far, too exposed. He needed distance first. He cut between buildings, emerged onto a side street, nearly collided with a woman carrying laundry. She shrieked. He kept going. A shot rang out. The bullet struck wood somewhere to his left. Elias ducked into another alley, this one narrower. His shoulders scraped brick. He could hear them spreading out, trying to cut off escape routes. How many? 3? 4? He circled back toward the main street, using the maze of passages between buildings, risked a glance around a corner. His horse still stood where he'd left it, now surrounded by 2 riders on horseback. Damn. He waited, watched. One of the riders dismounted to check the saddlebags. The other scanned the street. Weapon drawn. Elias picked up a rock and threw it hard toward the opposite end of the street. It clattered against a storefront window. Both riders turned that direction. He moved fast, crossed the open space, grabbed his horse's reins, swung into the saddle. The riders shouted. One raised his pistol. Elias kicked his mount into motion, leaning low. Another shot cracked through the air. He felt the bullet pass close enough to disturb the air near his head. Then he was out of town, riding hard toward the forest trail. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit faded gradually as his horse's speed created distance. His hands were shaking. One knuckle bled where he'd scraped it on the fence. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. His breathing came ragged and harsh. They'd known he was coming, had people watching, had set everything up to trap him here, to punish him for past sins against their system. The twins. He'd left them alone in the cabin. What if riders had already found them? He pushed the horse faster. By the time he reached the cabin, the sun had begun its descent toward evening. His horse was lathered with sweat. Elias dismounted quickly, scanning the clearing. Empty. No, not empty. Fresh hoofprints circled the cabin. Multiple horses. Recent. His chest tightened. Mara? Mabel? Silence answered him. Then movement in the brush to his left. He spun, reaching for his weapon. Mara emerged first, that broken chair leg clutched in her hands like a club. Mabel followed, her face streaked with dirt and tears. You brought them here, Mara said flatly. You brought them right to us. I didn't. There were riders, 4 of them, circling, searching. Mara's voice shook with fury and fear. We hid in the brush while they checked the cabin, while they looked for us. Because you led them here. Listen to me. Why should we? Mara stepped closer, weapon raised. Why should we listen to anything you say when you just proved we were right not to trust you? Elias held up his hands, palms out, his torn shirt and bleeding knuckles visible. The wild look in his eyes from the desperate ride. I didn't bring them. They were already hunting me. It was a trap. The whole bounty assignment was fake. They lured me here to kill me for helping that woman 3 years ago. The words spilled out quickly. I barely escaped town. They were waiting. They know I'm in this territory. Mabel studied his appearance, the disheveled state, the genuine panic in his expression. Show me your hands, she said softly. Elias extended them. Bruised knuckles on the right, scraped palms on both. Fresh injuries, new enough to still bleed slightly. He's telling the truth, Mabel whispered. We don't know that, Mara countered, but uncertainty crept into her voice. He could have stayed in town, could have let them take us, could have saved himself. Mabel moved closer to examine Elias's injuries. Instead, he came back, hurt and scared and warning us. Mara lowered her makeshift weapon slowly. Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The riders who came, he said. Did they see you? No, Mabel answered. We heard them coming, hid before they arrived. They'll come back. More of them. Elias looked toward the darkening forest. We can't stay here. Where can we go? Mara asked. The question carried exhausted resignation. I don't know yet. But standing still means dying. They moved back into the cabin as twilight deepened. Elias rekindled the fire, its light casting wavering shadows across the walls. The twins settled near the warmth, their bodies still tense but no longer coiled to flee. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, night birds began their songs. Finally, Mabel broke the silence. Her voice came barely above a whisper. We can't survive alone. Not with them hunting us. Not with nowhere to go. Mara said nothing, but she didn't disagree. The fire had burned down to embers when Mabel finally spoke again. She sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the dying flames. There's something we didn't tell you. Elias looked up from where he'd been examining his torn shirt. Mara shot her sister a warning glance, but Mabel continued anyway. Charles Breyer is planning a sale. A big one. He's been advertising it for weeks now in all the neighboring counties. Sales happen, Elias said carefully. What makes this one different? He's selling families, whole families, breaking them apart piece by piece. Mabel's voice cracked. Our younger siblings, Thomas is 8, Sarah is 6, little Emma just turned 4 last month. They're all scheduled to be sold. Different buyers, different states. The words hit Elias like a physical blow. He'd heard of such sales, had seen the aftermath once, a mother screaming as wagons carried her children in 3 different directions. The memory still woke him some nights. When? He asked. 5 days from now, Mara said. Maybe 6 if the weather delays buyers traveling from Georgia. That's why we tried to escape. We thought if we could get free, we could come back with help, could stop it somehow. Instead, we got caught, Mabel whispered, got punished, got left to die as a warning to anyone else thinking about running. Elias stood abruptly and moved to his saddlebag. He pulled out a small notebook and pencil, then knelt by the fire and began sketching in the dirt floor with a stick instead, saving the paper. "What are you doing?" Mara demanded. "Planning." He drew rough lines representing roads and boundaries. "I've tracked fugitives around plantation territories for years. I know how these places work. Guard rotations, weak points in patrols, where they keep people before sales. You think we can just walk in and take them?" Mara's voice rose. "While you draw pictures in the dirt like this is some kind of game? No, I think charging in blindly gets us all killed, and those children still sold." Elias kept drawing. "Here. This is likely where they're holding families before the sale. Close to the main house, but separated. Locked quarters. 2, maybe 3 guards at night." "We don't have time for careful planning," Mara insisted. "Every day we wait is another day closer to what? To you dying trying to save them." Elias looked up at her. "To all of us getting caught and making things worse? So, what do you suggest? We sit here while our family gets torn apart? I suggest we find help." The twins exchanged glances. "What kind of help?" Mabel asked. Elias sat back on his heels. "There's a network. Free black farmers who settled in the back country. Traveling preachers who pass through with coded sermons. Former enslaved people who know the routes north. They move quiet, keep to themselves, but they help people escape when they can." "How do you know about them?" Mara's suspicion returned full force. "Because I've crossed paths with them before. Usually they vanish before I can get close, but I've seen the signs, found the markers they leave, recognized the patterns." He paused. 3 years ago, when I helped that woman and her son, it was one of their people who actually got them north safely. I just got them to the meeting point." "And you think they'll help us?" Mabel asked. "Even with you involved?" "I think they might help you." "Me?" Elias shrugged. "They'll probably want to shoot me on sight. Can't blame them for that. But if you vouch for me, explain what we're trying to do, they might listen." Mara stood and paced the small cabin. "This network, where do we find them?" "There's a church about 15 miles northwest. Small place, mostly black congregation. Preacher there is named Josiah. If anyone can connect us to help, it's him. If he doesn't turn us in first," Mara muttered. "He won't. Josiah's people have been free for 2 generations. He hates the plantation system as much as anyone." Mabel rose and moved to stand beside her sister. "Mara, we need help. You know we do. We can't do this alone." "We don't know him." Mara gestured sharply at Elias. "We don't know his preacher friend. We don't know any of these people he's talking about. For all we know, this is another trap." "Then what's your plan?" Mabel challenged. "Because I don't have one. And Thomas and Sarah and Emma don't have time for us to figure it out on our own." Mara's jaw clenched. She looked at Elias with undisguised distrust. "Why? Why would you risk this much? You're a white man, a bounty hunter. This system works for you. You could have walked away from us in that clearing. Could have left town and never looked back. Why are you still here?" Elias met her gaze steadily. The fire had burned lower, casting half his face in shadow. "Because I failed one mother. I won't fail another family." The words hung in the air between them. Mara studied his expression, searching for deception, for hidden motives, for any sign that this was performance rather than truth. "I don't trust you," she said finally. "I know, but I don't have better options. I know that too. If you betray us, if you lead us into danger and run, I will find you, somehow, and I will make you pay for it. Understood?" Mara looked at her sister. Mabel nodded slightly. The decision made, fragile and uncertain as morning mist, but made nonetheless. "We leave at first light," Mara said. "Find this preacher. See if your network is real, or just another story white men tell themselves to feel better about the evil they profit from." "Fair enough." They settled back around the fire. Nobody spoke much after that. The weight of what they'd agreed to pressed down on all 3 of them. 5 days, maybe 6. Not much time to organize a rescue that would likely get them killed. But doing nothing guaranteed those children would be lost forever. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling leaves and carrying the distant sound of night creatures hunting in the darkness. The forest had its own rhythms, its own brutal logic of survival. Inside the cabin, three people who had no reason to trust each other tried to rest while planning an act that defied every structure of power that governed their world. Eventually, exhaustion claimed the twins. They curled together on one bedroll, Mabel's hand clutching her sister's arm, even in sleep. Their breathing gradually steadied into the rhythm of uneasy dreams. Elias moved to the doorway and sat with his back against the frame. His pistol rested across his lap, familiar and cold. Moonlight spilled through the broken roof slats, painting silver stripes across the dirt floor where he'd sketched his rough map. The night deepened. Somewhere far off, an owl called. Closer, a branch snapped under some animal's weight. Elias kept watch, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the cabin, his mind turning over plans and possibilities and the very real chance that none of them would survive what came next. Dawn came cold and gray, mist clinging to the ground like smoke. Elias extinguished the last embers while the twins gathered what little they had. Nobody spoke. The air felt too fragile for words. They moved through the forest in single file. Elias led, reading signs in broken twigs and disturbed leaves. The twins followed close, their feet finding quiet places to step. Years of moving through plantation grounds unnoticed had taught them how to walk without sound. The woods grew denser as they traveled northwest. Pine gave way to oak and hickory. Creeks appeared and disappeared. Birds began their morning songs, tentative at first, then building into full chorus. After 2 hours, Mara whispered, "How much farther?" "Another mile. Maybe less." Elias kept his voice low. "The settlement sits in a valley. Natural protection. Hard to find unless you know where to look." They continued in silence. The sun climbed higher, but the canopy kept them in shadow. Elias stopped occasionally to check their direction against landmarks only he seemed to recognize. Finally, they emerged onto a ridge overlooking a small clearing. Below, simple cabins dotted the landscape. Vegetable gardens grew in neat rows. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children played near a well, while women hung laundry, and men worked in fields beyond. At the center stood a chapel, whitewashed boards and a modest steeple. Nothing grand, just solid and real. "That's it," Elias said. They descended carefully. As they approached the settlement, people noticed. Work stopped. Conversations ceased. Men moved closer to their families. Women pulled children indoors. An older black man emerged from the chapel, tall and lean, hair gone gray at the temples. He wore simple clothes, but carried himself with quiet authority. His eyes swept over the twins first, then fixed on Elias with unmistakable recognition. "Mara and Mabel," he said, "from Briar Hollow. We heard you were dead." "We're not," Mara replied. Clearly. The man's gaze shifted to Elias. "And you brought a white man. A bounty hunter, if I'm reading those tools on your belt correctly. My name is Elias Creed. I need to speak with Preacher Josiah." "You're speaking to him." Josiah's expression remained neutral. "Question is whether you'll be doing any more speaking after this conversation ends." 3 men had appeared behind them, blocking the path back to the woods. Not threatening yet, just present. "I helped them," Elias said simply. "Found them hanging. Cut them down. They need help saving their family, and I intend to provide it. White men's intentions often differ from their actions. I know." Josiah studied him for a long moment. Then he looked at the twins. "Is this true? He helped you?" "Yes," Mabel said quietly. "He did," Mara added, her voice harder. "But we don't fully trust him. We're here because we have no choice. Honest, at least." Josiah gestured toward the chapel. "Come inside. All of you. We'll talk where fewer ears can hear. The chapel interior was simple. Wooden benches faced a plain pulpit. Sunlight streamed through windows on both sides. The air smelled of old hymn books and pine soap. Josiah sat on the front bench. The twins took the one behind. Elias remained standing until Josiah pointed to a seat across the aisle. "Tell me everything," the preacher said. They did, taking turns, filling in details. The fake bounty, the hanging tree, the cabin, Charles Breyer's planned sale, the desperate timeline they faced. When they finished, Josiah sat silent for several minutes. Outside, normal settlement sounds resumed. Hammers on wood, children laughing, life continuing despite everything. 5 days, Josiah finally said. Not much time. "We know," Mara replied. "You're asking us to risk our freedom, our families, everything we've built here." "Yes." Josiah looked at Elias again. "I remember you, 3 years back. You brought Rebecca Martin and her boy Samuel to the meeting point near the river. Stayed until our people arrived to guide them north. Took a knife across the ribs from a tracker who followed you." Elias instinctively touched his left side, where the scar still pulled tight when he breathed deep. "You never asked for payment," Josiah continued. "Never asked for thanks. Just waited to make sure they were safe, then disappeared back into the woods bleeding. I did what needed doing. Most white men wouldn't have." Josiah stood and moved to the window. "Most white men profit from the system or ignore it entirely. Very few stand against it when it costs them something real." He turned back to face them. "I'll help, but I need to consult with the others. This isn't my decision alone." The meeting convened an hour later in a barn behind the chapel. 20 people gathered, men and women, young and old, all free but carrying memories of what freedom had cost. They debated in low, intense voices. Some argued against involving themselves in plantation business. Too dangerous, too likely to bring retribution down on the settlement. Others insisted they couldn't abandon children to Breyer's cruelty. Finally, a woman named Ruth spoke. She'd escaped Breyer Hollow 5 years earlier, scars still visible on her forearms. "Those children are why we built this place, so families wouldn't be torn apart, so children could grow up free." She looked around the barn. "If we don't help them, what's the point of any of this?" The vote came quickly after that. Unanimous. Josiah spread a map on a workbench. Others crowded around, adding details, correcting boundaries, marking guard positions they remembered or had heard about through the whisper network that connected enslaved people across counties. "We free the families the night before the sale," Josiah said. "Quiet, controlled. No violence unless absolutely necessary." "How?" Elias asked. "Coded hymns. We'll have people working in the fields that day. They'll signal with songs. Wade in the water means guards are moving. Steal away means the path is clear." Everyone who grew up enslaved knows the meanings. A younger man named Isaac added, "We disable their security without them realizing it's been done. Loosen wagon wheels so they can't pursue quickly. Scatter their horses during the afternoon so gathering them wastes time." "What about weapons?" Mara asked. "We have some," Josiah admitted. "Not many. Mostly old muskets and hunting rifles. But noise brings attention we can't afford." They planned for hours. Every detail examined. Every risk weighed. Elias contributed knowledge of patrol patterns and tracking methods. The twins provided inside information about building layouts and where families were likely held. As afternoon faded toward evening, Ruth approached Mara and Mabel. "You'll need to know how to move through fields at night without being seen. Come with me." She led them outside while others continued planning. Showed them how to read the wind, how to use shadows, how to freeze completely when danger approached. The twins absorbed everything, their plantation experience combining with Ruth's refined techniques. Inside, Josiah pulled Elias aside. "They don't fully trust you." "I know. Can't blame them. Trust is expensive for people who've been hunted. I understand. Do you? Josiah's eyes were sharp. Because understanding intellectually and feeling it in your bones are different things entirely. Elias met his gaze steadily. I failed someone once. A mother begging me not to return her and her child to a place that would destroy them both. I almost did it anyway. Almost chose money and reputation over their lives. But you didn't. No. But I came close enough to know exactly what I am, what I was, and I can't be that person again. Josiah nodded slowly. Then prove it. Not with words. With action, when it matters most. Night fell as the group made final preparations. They gathered supplies, food, rope, dark clothing, cloth to muffle sounds. Weapons were checked and rechecked. They left the settlement in small groups, traveling separate paths that would converge near Briar Hollow. Less suspicious than a large gathering. Harder to track. Elias, Mara, and Mabel moved together with Josiah and 3 others. They traveled in silence, communicating with hand signals when necessary. The forest grew darker as clouds obscured the moon. Hours later, they reached a concealed grove a half-mile from the plantation's northern boundary. Others had already arrived. More would come before dawn. A small fire burned in a depression, surrounded by stones to contain the light. People sat in clusters, speaking in whispers, or not at all. The weight of what approached hung over everyone like a physical presence. Mara sat apart, sharpening a knife she'd been given. The repetitive scrape of stone on steel filled the quiet spaces between whispered conversations. Elias approached with 2 tin cups of weak coffee. He offered one. She took it without looking at him. "You did well today," he said. "Learning from Ruth. Asking good questions during planning. I'm trying to survive. To save my family. Don't mistake that for trust." "I won't." Mara finally looked up. Her eyes reflected firelight, hard and evaluating. "Josiah believes you're genuine. Ruth thinks you're trying to atone. They might be right. But I've seen too many white men perform goodness when it costs them nothing. This costs me plenty. We'll see. Tomorrow night, when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, that's when we'll know who you really are." She returned to sharpening her knife. The conversation clearly finished. Elias moved back to the fire. Across from him, Mabel watched her sister with worried eyes. The twins had barely spoken to each other since arriving at the settlement. Some tension he didn't fully understand had grown between them. Around the grove, people settled in for a few hours of rest. Before dawn brought the final day of preparation. Tomorrow, they would position themselves, learn guard rotations firsthand, identify the exact locations where families were held. Then, tomorrow night, they would attempt something that could free dozens of people or get them all killed. The grove fell silent as midnight approached. Elias checked his pocket watch by firelight. 2 hours until they moved. Around him, people prepared in their own ways. Some prayed quietly. Others sat motionless, conserving energy. Ruth distributed strips of dark cloth to tie around arms for identification in darkness. Josiah moved between groups, offering quiet words of encouragement. Mara stood abruptly and walked to where Elias sat against a tree. "Show me the patrol pattern again." He traced it in the dirt with a stick. 3 guards rotate every 2 hours. They meet here at the equipment shed, smoke tobacco for 5 minutes, then split up. That's when we move. And the weapons? Sabotaged this afternoon while you were learning field movement. Firing pins removed from their rifles. Barrels plugged with clay on their pistols. They won't realize until they try to use them. Mabel joined them, sitting cross-legged beside her sister. What about the dogs? Meat scraps laced with valerian root. Ruth left them near the kennels at sunset. The dogs will be drowsy, but not obviously drugged. You've thought of everything, Mabel said softly. I've tried. But plans fall apart when reality hits. That's why we adapt, Mara said. That's how we've survived this long. Josiah approached. Time to move into position. The group dispersed like smoke. They traveled in predetermined directions, each person knowing exactly where to go and what to do. Years of practice showed in how silently they moved, how efficiently they communicated without words. Elias led Mara and Mabel along the northern approach. They stayed low, moving through tall grass that whispered against their clothing. The plantation loomed ahead, dark except for a few lanterns marking guard positions. They reached the tree line and stopped. Elias held up 3 fingers, pointing toward the guards he'd mentioned. Right on schedule, the 3 men converged at the equipment shed. Orange firefly glow marked their tobacco pipes. Laughter carried across the distance. They were relaxed, confident, completely unaware. "Now," Elias whispered. Mara and Mabel slipped away toward the slave quarters, while Elias circled toward the main compound. His boots made no sound on grass still damp with dew. Every movement was calculated, controlled. He reached the equipment shed and pressed against the wall. Inside, he heard the guard's conversation clearly. "Briar's making a fortune tomorrow. 50 head at least. Should have kept some for ourselves. Man could use extra hands. You want to explain that to him? I'd rather keep my skin attached." They laughed again. Elias waited until they separated, each heading to different sections of the property. Then he moved to the livestock pens. The horses stirred as he approached, but didn't alarm. He'd spent the previous afternoon getting them accustomed to his scent. Now he opened gates quietly, creating escape routes without forcing immediate flight. When the time came, a single loud noise would send them scattering. Meanwhile, Mara and Mabel reached the quarters. Rows of small cabins stood in neat lines, each housing families that would be torn apart come morning. Mabel tapped softly on the first door, using the coded rhythm Josiah had taught them. The door cracked open. A woman's frightened face appeared. "We're here to help," Mabel whispered. "Are Sarah and Samuel here?" The woman's eyes widened in recognition. She'd known the twins before their attempted escape. "Third cabin down. But child, this is dangerous. It's now or never." Mara interrupted. "Gather your family. Stay quiet. When you hear the signal, follow the people waiting in the trees." They moved cabin to cabin, spreading the word. Some families responded immediately. Others were too terrified to believe freedom was possible. A few thought it was a trap designed to identify troublemakers. But slowly, carefully, small groups began forming in the shadows between buildings. Parents clutched children's hands. Elderly grandparents were supported by younger relatives. Everyone moved with practiced silence, born from years of surviving under threat. Mara found the third cabin and knocked. A young boy answered, maybe 7 years old. His eyes went wide. "Mara?" "Samuel." She knelt to his level. "Where's Sarah?" "Sleeping. We thought you were dead." They said, "I know what they said. Wake your sister. Quietly. Don't pack anything. We're leaving right now." The boy disappeared inside. Mara's hands shook as she waited. This was why they'd risked everything. Why they'd trusted a white bounty hunter who should have been their enemy. Why they'd walked back into the place that had nearly killed them. Sarah appeared, older than Samuel by maybe 3 years. She stumbled into Mara's arms, sobbing silently. "We have to move," Mabel urged. "Others are waiting." They guided the children toward the gathering point. More families had assembled now, maybe 30 people total, including small children who were being carried to prevent crying. Across the plantation, Josiah's group worked on the road. They'd positioned a wagon sideways, made it look like an accident. Any riders trying to bring reinforcements would face significant delay. Behind them in the trees, armed men waited in case overseers tried to clear the obstacle. Elias completed his circuit and returned to where the twins waited with their siblings. He counted heads quickly. More people than expected. Good, but complicated. "Equipment shed is sabotaged," he reported. "Horses are ready to scatter. Guards are separated and unaware. Then we go," Mara said. They began moving families into the woods in small waves. Ruth and others waited to guide them to safe houses scattered across 3 counties. The operation unfolded with remarkable precision. Every element working exactly as planned. Too perfectly, Elias thought. But he pushed the worry aside. A guard rounded a building and stopped, seeing the movement. Before he could shout, Isaac appeared behind him and struck hard. The man dropped without a sound. They dragged him into shadows and bound him with strips of cloth. More families escaped. The quarters were nearly empty now. Just a few more minutes and everyone would be... A bell clanged suddenly, loud and sharp. The alarm. "Move faster," Josiah urged from the trees. "We're out of time." The livestock scattered as planned, horses galloping in all directions. Chickens exploded from their coops. The noise created perfect chaos. Guards shouted, confusion evident in their voices. Families ran now instead of walking carefully. Children whimpered. Parents whispered desperate encouragements. The organized evacuation became controlled panic, but it was working. People reached the tree line and disappeared into safe hands, one after another. Freedom claiming those who'd been denied it for so long. Mara and Mabel stood with Sarah and Samuel at the base of the big house steps. Around them, the plantation descended into beautiful disorder. Their plan had succeeded beyond hope. "We did it," Mabel breathed. Mara pulled both children close. "You're safe now. You're—" The front doors slammed open with tremendous force. Charles Breyer stood framed in lantern light, still in his nightclothes, but holding a pistol with absolute steadiness. The weapon aimed directly at Mara's chest. His face twisted with rage so pure it seemed inhuman. "Did you really think," he said quietly, "that I wouldn't have one final surprise?" The pistol gleamed in Breyer's steady hand. Behind him, lamplight from the big house cast his shadow long across the ground. His face held an expression of terrible satisfaction. "You freed my property," he said calmly. "Ruined my sale. Cost me thousands. But you can't save what I already sold." Mara's breath caught. "What?" "Sarah and Samuel." Breyer's smile widened. "Sold them 2 days ago to a trader heading to New Orleans. They're halfway to the coast by now." The words hit like physical blows. Mara's knees buckled. She grabbed the porch railing to stay upright. "No," Mabel whispered. "No, you're lying. They're here. We saw them. You saw children who look similar in the dark." Breyer descended 1 step. "Did you actually touch them? Speak to them close enough to be certain? Or did you see what you desperately wanted to see?" Mara's mind raced backward. The cabin door. The boy's face, half hidden in shadows. The girl who'd stumbled into her arms crying but never speaking. The height seemed right. The age seemed right. But the voice, she hadn't heard their voices clearly. Not really. Her legs gave out completely. She collapsed onto the steps, a sound escaping her throat that was barely human. Years of pain compressed into a single wail. Mabel screamed, pure anguish. She dropped to her knees beside her sister. "Get up," Breyer commanded. "Both of you. You're coming with me. I'll make examples of you that'll be remembered for generations." Elias moved without thinking. He stepped between the twins and the pistol, arms spread wide. "Leave them alone. The traitor speaks." Breyer adjusted his aim. "You cost me a wife's loyalty once. Cost me reputation when word spread that you'd turned soft. Now you cost me profit. I should have killed you years ago." "You can try." Breyer fired. The shot cracked across the plantation grounds. Elias jerked sideways as the bullet tore through his left shoulder. Blood bloomed instantly across his shirt. He staggered, but didn't fall. "Elias!" Mabel grabbed his arm as he swayed. Breyer cocked the pistol again, preparing for a second shot. But before he could fire, something else captured his attention. Movement in the fields, people escaping, his wealth vanishing into darkness. His face transformed. Rage became something colder, more calculated. He turned and grabbed a lantern from inside the doorway. "If I can't have them," he said quietly. "Nobody can." He threw the lantern hard. It shattered against the side of the big house. Oil splashed across wooden siding. Flames caught immediately, spreading with horrible speed across dry timber. He grabbed another lantern, threw it toward the equipment shed. Fire bloomed there too. "Stop!" Josiah's voice shouted from somewhere in the darkness, but Briar kept moving. He ran along the porch, knocking over every lamp and candle he could reach. Fire spread in his wake like a living creature. The big house ignited. The barns caught. Dry grass between buildings became rivers of flame. Smoke thickened rapidly. Heat pressed against skin. The beautiful chaos of liberation transformed into genuine disaster. Elias clutched his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. His vision blurred at the edges. "We have to move," he gasped. "The fire will trap everyone." Mara remained frozen on the steps, still processing the revelation about her siblings. Mabel shook her desperately. "Mara, please, we have to go. Now." "They're gone," Mara whispered. "It was all for nothing." "It wasn't for nothing. We freed 30 people. But they'll die if we don't move." Mara looked up. Tears streaked her face. "I don't care." Elias dropped to one knee beside them, his face pale from blood loss. "I know you're hurting, but those families have children too. Children who need protecting. We can grieve later. Right now, we lead." Something in his voice cut through Mara's shock. She wiped her face roughly and stood on unsteady legs. "Where's Briar?" "Gone." Elias pointed toward the trees. "Ran once, he started the fires." "We should have moved faster," Mara said bitterly. "We wasted time being careful. If we'd just charged in—" "We'd all be dead," Elias interrupted. "This isn't your fault." "Isn't it?" Mara's voice rose. "You said trust the plan. You said we'd save them. You promised." "I never promised. I said we'd try. And we failed." Mabel grabbed both their arms. "Stop it. Both of you. We can blame each other after we save the people who are still here." A section of roof collapsed behind them, sending sparks spiraling into the pre-dawn sky. The heat intensified. Smoke made breathing difficult. They stumbled away from the big house. Around them, freed families ran in scattered directions. Some headed for the woods. Others froze in panic. Children cried. Adults shouted names of loved ones lost in chaos. Josiah appeared through the smoke, his face streaked with ash. "We need to organize a retreat." "Now." "The road?" Elias asked, leaning heavily on Mabel. "Blocked still, but fire's spreading that direction too." "Then we go through the fields." Mara's voice had gone flat. "Empty, straight north, away from everything." She moved among the panicking families, grabbing shoulders, redirecting movement. Her grief transformed into cold efficiency. If she couldn't save her siblings, she'd save everyone else. It was all she had left. Mabel supported Elias as they walked. His blood soaked her sleeve. His breathing grew labored. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "About your siblings. I should have considered he'd move them early." "You couldn't have known," Mabel said. But her voice held no warmth. Hope had died with Briar's revelation. They reached the forest edge as sunrise broke across the horizon. Behind them, Briar Hollow Plantation burned. Flames consumed buildings, fields, everything. Smoke rose in a massive column visible for miles. The freed families gathered in the clearing where they'd camped the night before. Exhausted, terrified, free but homeless. Their faith in liberation shaken by how close disaster had come. Elias collapsed against a tree. Ruth rushed to tend his wound, but supplies were limited. His face had gone gray. Mara stood apart from everyone, staring at nothing. Mabel sat beside her, equally hollow. "We did the right thing," Mabel whispered finally. Didn't we? I don't know anymore. Ash floated through the air like snow. The morning sun turned red, filtering through smoke. People huddled together, uncertain what came next. They'd escaped slavery only to face an uncertain future with no shelter, no food, and no guarantee of safety. Josiah moved among them, offering what comfort he could. But even his faith seemed tested by the night's events. The fire burned through the morning. By noon, nothing remained of Briar Hollow but smoking ruins and bitter memories. The smoke thinned as morning stretched toward midday, but it never fully cleared. Ash still drifted through the air, settling on clothes, hair, the canvas sheets stretched between trees. The grove had transformed from a staging ground into a refugee camp. 32 people sat scattered across the clearing. Some huddled in small groups. Others kept to themselves. A few children slept despite the chaos, exhausted beyond fear. The adults wore expressions of stunned disbelief. Free, yes, but at what cost? Elias leaned against an oak tree, his left shoulder wrapped in torn strips of fabric. Ruth had cleaned the wound as best she could with limited supplies. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing bone, but he'd lost significant blood. His face remained pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning chill. Mabel knelt beside him, checking the bandage for fresh bleeding. Her hands moved mechanically. Her eyes stared at nothing. "It's holding," she said quietly. "Good." Elias shifted, wincing. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." The words came out flat, hollow. Mabel had spent the last hour helping others, distributing water, comforting children, organizing supplies, but her movements lacked purpose. She went through motions because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling hurt too much. Across the clearing, Mara sat alone on a fallen log. She hadn't moved in over an hour, hadn't spoken. She stared at her hands like they belonged to someone else. Her fingers curled and uncurled slowly, testing whether they still worked. She'd led people through smoke and fire, pulled children from burning buildings, directed families toward safety with absolute authority. But now that everyone was safe, she had nothing left. The purpose that had driven her drained away, leaving only emptiness. Josiah moved among the refugees, offering water and quiet words. Several men worked to construct crude shelters from fallen branches and salvaged canvas. Others foraged for edible plants nearby. The preacher had transformed chaos into organization through sheer force of calm leadership. He approached Elias carefully, mindful of the injury. "How's the shoulder?" "Hurts." Elias managed a weak smile. "But I'll live." "Good. We need you living." Josiah glanced toward Mara. "How are the girls?" "Broken," Mabel answered before Elias could. "We thought we'd save them, thought we'd done something that mattered. But we were too slow, too careful. And now Sarah and Samuel are gone." "You freed 32 people," Josiah said gently. "That matters." "Does it?" Mabel's voice cracked. "Because right now, it feels like we traded everything for nothing." Josiah had no answer to that. He squeezed her shoulder and moved on to check other families. Elias watched Mara for a long moment. Her stillness worried him more than her anger would have. Anger he understood. Stillness meant she'd stopped fighting. "Mabel," he said carefully, "we need to go back." She looked at him like he'd suggested flying. "Back where?" "Briar's office. Before the building collapses completely." "Why would we do that?" "Because men like Briar keep records, ledgers, documentation of every transaction." Elias struggled to sit straighter, gritting his teeth against pain. "If he sold your siblings," he wrote it down. Names, dates, locations, buyers, everything. Mabel's eyes widened. Hope flickered there briefly, before dying. The fire destroyed everything. Maybe. But those offices have iron safes. Thick walls. Things survive fires all the time. He met her gaze steadily. It's worth checking. I don't know if Mara can. Then you come with me. We'll bring back what we find. Mabel hesitated, glancing at her sister. Mara still hadn't moved, still stared at nothing. She needs something to hope for, Elias said quietly. So do you. After a long moment, Mabel nodded. They stood together. Elias swayed slightly, and Mabel caught his good arm to steady him. They walked toward where Mara sat. She didn't look up as they approached. We're going back to the ruins, Mabel said. No response. Elias thinks there might be records. Information about where they took Sarah and Samuel. Mara's fingers stopped moving. Don't! Don't what? Don't give me hope. I can't. Her voice broke. I can't do that again. Then don't hope, Elias said. Just wait. We'll be back soon. They left her there and walked toward what remained of Briar Hollow. The journey took 20 minutes. Smoke still rose from hot spots throughout the property. Collapsed buildings smoldered. The big house stood partially intact. One wing had survived the flames, though blackened and unstable. Elias led them carefully through debris. His tracking instincts guided him around weak floors and dangerous overhangs. They reached what had been the plantation office. The door had burned away, but interior walls still stood. In the corner, an iron safe sat untouched by flames. Soot covered it, but the metal hadn't warped. There, Elias pointed. Mabel rushed forward. She tried the handle. Locked. Elias pulled lockpicks from his belt. His hands shook from blood loss, making the delicate work nearly impossible. Mabel gently took the picks from him. Show me how. He talked her through it. After several failed attempts, the lock clicked. The safe door swung open. Inside sat stacks of leather-bound ledgers, untouched by smoke or flame. Mabel pulled them out reverently. She opened the top book. Page after page of meticulous entries. Names, ages, prices, destination. The systematic documentation of human beings bought and sold like livestock. She flipped through quickly, searching. Her finger traced down columns until she found what she needed. Sarah and Samuel Freeman, age 7 and 5. Sold to Marcus Whitfield, New Orleans trader. Destination: Whitfield Estate. Plaquemines, Parish. Her hands trembled, holding the ledger. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. They're alive, she whispered. We know where they are. Elias leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Then we go get them. Mabel clutched the ledgers to her chest and helped support Elias as they made their way back to the grove. The return journey felt lighter despite his injury. They had something concrete now. A direction, a purpose. Mara looked up as they approached. She saw the books in Mabel's arms, saw the expression on her sister's face. What did you find? Mabel knelt beside her, opening the ledger to the correct page. Mara read the entry, read it again. Her breath caught. This is real? They're really there? According to Briar's records. Mara stood abruptly. Energy flooded back into her movements. Then we leave now. Right now. We need horses, Elias said. Supplies. A plan. I don't care about plans. Mara's voice rose. Plans failed us before. No. Elias met her fierce gaze steadily. Men failed you. Briar failed you. I failed you by not considering he'd move fast. But the plan worked. We freed everyone we could reach. Now we adapt the plan and go after the ones we missed. Mara opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. She looked at Elias, really looked at him, saw his pale face, his blood-stained shoulder, his exhaustion, saw that he'd risked his life and nearly died for people he'd never met. I blamed you, she said quietly, for not moving faster. I know. You couldn't have known what Briar would do. Doesn't change that I wish I had. Mara was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its sharp edge. You tried to help. Through your own guilt, your own broken places, you still tried. I didn't see that before. We all tried, Mabel added. We just didn't have all the information. But now we do. Mara gestured toward the ledgers. So what do we do with it? Elias straightened, despite the pain. We ride to New Orleans, find the Whitfield estate, and we bring your siblings home. Together, Mabel said firmly. We walk together now. No more fighting each other. Mara extended her hand to Elias. He took it carefully, and she pulled him upright. The gesture was small but significant, an acknowledgement of partnership, of trust earned through fire. Josiah approached with 3 horses, acquired from where plantation riders had abandoned them during the chaos. Heard you're leaving. We have to, Mara said. I know. Take these. We'll care for the others here until they're ready to move on. They prepared quickly, filled saddlebags with provisions, secured the ledgers carefully, checked weapons and water supplies. The freed families gathered to watch them go. Ruth blessed them quietly. Other voices called out thanks and prayers for safe travel. Elias mounted first, moving stiffly. Mabel and Mara swung up onto their horses with practiced ease. They sat tall despite exhaustion, despite grief, despite everything. Overhead, clouds that had hung heavy all morning began to part. Sunlight broke through in scattered beams, illuminating the path ahead. Mara looked at her sister, at Elias, at the road stretching south toward New Orleans. Ready? She asked. Ready, they answered together. They rode out of the grove at a steady pace, leaving smoke and ruin behind. 3 people bound by trauma and purpose, riding toward an uncertain confrontation, but no longer broken by fear. The path ahead was long, dangerous, but for the first time since the hanging tree, they faced it united. The riverfront trading post squatted beside muddy water like something ashamed of itself. Weathered planks sagged, paint peeled in long strips. A single dock extended into the current, where a small boat bobbed against rotting pilings. Elias studied the building from behind a stand of cypress trees. His shoulder throbbed beneath fresh bandages, but the pain had become manageable. 3 days of hard riding had brought them here, following information gleaned from Briar's ledgers and whispered rumors in river towns. Mara crouched beside him, her eyes sharp. 2 men on the porch, maybe more inside. Briar's there, Mabel confirmed quietly. She'd spotted him through a window moments earlier. Pacing, looks nervous. He should be. Elias checked his pistol. He knows someone's coming eventually. The afternoon sun hung low, painting the river gold and orange. Insects buzzed in the humid air. Somewhere a bird called out, lonely and distant. They'd tracked Briar to this isolated spot after learning he'd fled south immediately after the fire. He'd abandoned his plantation, his reputation, everything, taking only cash and weapons. Now he hid in this forgotten corner of Louisiana, waiting for passage to Texas. He wouldn't make it. Elias looked at the twins. They'd grown harder during the journey, more focused. The grief remained, but it had transformed into something sharp and useful, purpose instead of despair. Remember the plan, he said. Quick and quiet. We need him alive. Mara's jaw tightened. I remember. They'd argued about this. Mara wanted blood, wanted Briar to suffer the way her family had suffered. Elias understood that rage, had felt it himself many times, but he'd convinced her that death would be too easy, too quick. Men like Briar fear humiliation more than death, he'd told her. Let the law parade him. Let everyone see what he is. She'd agreed reluctantly. Now they moved into position. Elias circled wide, approaching the building from behind. His boots found quiet purchase on soft earth. He pressed against the back wall, listening. Inside, muffled voices argued about money, about whether to leave tonight or wait for dawn. On the opposite sides, Mara and Mabel advanced. They'd learned to move silently during their years on the plantation. Survival had demanded it. Now those skills served a different purpose. The 2 overseers on the porch stood lazy and bored. They expected no trouble here. Why would they? This place was miles from anywhere that mattered. Mara reached the corner first. She picked up a stone and threw it toward the dock. It splashed into the water with a loud plunk. Both overseers turned. What was that? Probably just a fish. Go check it out. One man descended the steps, grumbling. He walked toward the dock, hand resting on his pistol. When he passed Mabel's hiding spot, she struck him across the back of the head with a thick branch. He crumpled without a sound. The second overseer noticed something wrong. Hey, Jackson? Mara stepped onto the porch. The man spun toward her, reaching for his weapon. She was faster. Her fist connected with his throat. A strike Elias had taught her. The overseer gagged, stumbling backward. Mabel appeared and kicked his legs out from under him. He fell hard. They bound both men quickly using rope from their saddlebags, gagged them with strips of cloth, left them tied behind the building where Briar wouldn't see. Elias moved to the front door. He tested the handle. Unlocked. Of course it was. These men believed they were safe. He pushed it open slowly. The hinges creaked. Inside, Briar sat at a table counting money. He looked up sharply. His face went pale when he recognized Elias. You! The word came out strangled. Me! Elias stepped inside, pistol raised. Don't move! Briar's hand shot toward a rifle leaning against the wall. Elias fired, not at him, but at the rifle. The shot splintered wood and sent the weapon clattering across the floor. I said don't move! Briar froze. His eyes darted toward the back door, toward windows, searching for escape routes. Your men are tied up outside, Elias said calmly. There's nowhere to run. Briar's expression shifted from fear to calculation. How much do you want? I have money. Plenty of it. Name your price. There isn't one. Everyone has a price, Creed. You're a bounty hunter. You understand commerce. I understand that some debts can't be paid in cash. Briar grabbed the money off the table and held it out desperately. Take it. Take all of it. Just let me go. The back door opened. Briar spun and found himself staring at Mara and Mabel. They stood framed in afternoon light, their faces calm and cold. Recognition hit him. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. You're dead, he whispered. I watched you hang. You watched us play dead, Mara corrected. Because you're too arrogant to check a pulse. Briar backed against the wall. What do you want? Justice. Mabel's voice was steady as stone. For Sarah and Samuel. For everyone you sold. For everyone you hurt. They were property. I had every legal right. You had nothing, Mara interrupted. You stole lives, destroyed families, and now you'll answer for it. Briar lunged toward the front door. Elias blocked him easily despite his injured shoulder. Briar tried to fight, swinging wild punches. Elias deflected them and shoved him back into the center of the room. The plantation owner stumbled and fell. He looked up at the three figures surrounding him, at their weapons, at their faces filled with righteous certainty. Please, he begged, I'll leave Louisiana. You'll never see me again. I swear it. You're right about that, Mara said. We won't see you again, because you'll be in a federal prison. They bound him methodically, arms behind his back, ankles together. He struggled at first, then went limp when he realized resistance was useless. You can't do this, he said desperately. You're escaped slaves. You have no legal standing, no authority, but I do. Elias pulled Briar's ledgers from his saddlebag and dropped them on the table. These document every illegal sale you made, every fraudulent transaction, every violation of federal trading law. Briar stared at the books. His face went ashen. Those are private property. They're evidence. Mabel opened the top ledger to a marked page. This shows you sold children under the age designated for separation. That's illegal even by Louisiana standards. This page, Mara added, flipping to another section, Shows you falsified ownership documents, claimed people who were legally free. And this, Elias finished, shows you've been avoiding federal taxes on interstate sales. The government takes that seriously. Breyer's defiance crumbled. He sagged against his bindings, understanding finally settling over him. They weren't going to kill him. Something worse awaited. Public shame, legal proceedings, the slow dismantling of everything he'd built. "They'll never convict me," he said weakly. "Not based on testimony from—" "They won't need testimony," Elias said. "Your own records condemn you." They dragged him outside, loaded him into a wagon they'd acquired in the last town. The overseers remained tied behind the building. They'd send authorities back for them later. As they prepared to leave, Breyer made one last desperate attempt. "Creed, you're a white man. You understand how the world works. Help me, and I'll make you rich." Elias looked down at him without expression. "I understand exactly how the world works. That's why you're going to prison." They drove north toward the nearest federal marshal station. The journey took 2 days. Breyer alternated between begging and threatening. The twins ignored him completely. Elias occasionally told him to shut up. When they reached the marshal station, they presented the ledgers and their prisoner. The marshal, a tired-looking man named Porter, examined the evidence carefully. "This is extensive," he said, flipping through pages. "Very thorough documentation." Breyer liked keeping records, Mara said flatly. Porter nodded. "I'll take him into custody. This will go to federal court in New Orleans. You'll need to testify." "We'll be there," Elias confirmed. They watched as marshals led Breyer away in chains. He shouted threats until a door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. Mabel exhaled slowly. "It's done." "Almost," Mara corrected. She looked toward the south, toward New Orleans, toward where their siblings waited, unaware help was coming. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have hand-picked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.